Welcome, everybody. We're just going to let everyone filter in. Hope and I are so excited that you're joining us tonight. It is, or this afternoon, I guess, if you're out on the West Coast. So this afternoon, this evening, we are so happy you're here. It's going to take a little while for everyone to come in out of the waiting room. This has been an incredibly popular, no surprise, because it's Hope Edelman, an incredibly popular event this evening. We have hundreds upon hundreds of people joining us tonight. So let's just be a little bit patient as everyone filters in from the waiting room. I'm Allison Gilbert. I am so glad to see everyone joining us.
Don't shake your head.
Thank you so much. We're going to ask you, upon entry this evening, your mics were muted. We're going to ask you for now to keep your mics muted. I would also encourage you, just so it's easier to see Hope and keep your focus on Hope, that we all turn off our cameras until the Q&A. We are going to have time for you to talk directly with Hope. Please, in the chat button, what I would really encourage you to do, which I know I really enjoy, please put in the chat at the bottom of your screen. You'll see the chat where you're joining us from. What part of the country are you in? What city are you joining us from? And really, what brings you here tonight? We know it's Hope. We know it's Hope that brings you here. But is it because you're most interested in Hope's new book, The AfterGrief, which, wow, it is amazing. I've been lucky to see an advance copy. Or is it because you're just so a fan of Hope because of Motherless Daughters? So please put in the chat where you are from. Welcome. We are still letting people in out of the waiting room. This was a huge, no surprise, popular event for everyone to come into tonight. Hundreds upon hundreds of us are going to be in community tonight to hear exclusively for the first time about Hope's new book, The AfterGrief. I'm Allison Gilbert. I'm, first of all, most importantly, an FOH. I'm a friend of Hope's. I adore Hope. I would do anything for Hope. And, oh yeah, heart. And I am just so thrilled. We are still, it's 6:03 in New York and 3:03 on the West Coast. We are still letting people in out of the waiting room. So please hang in there. This is a tremendous success, which bodes so well for the release of Hope's new book, The AfterGrief, coming in October. So this is huge. Hope, I think you already have a New York Times bestseller on your hands, given the enthusiasm by which everyone is joining us already today. They're still piling in out of the waiting room, so thank you, everybody. I'm seeing everyone in the chat. If you're just into the meeting and you're out of the waiting room finally, I know Zoom takes a little bit of time to kind of let you through the virtual door. Please, in the chat, let Hope and me know where you're joining us from. I love to see in the chat where everyone is. I see Syracuse and I see California. Boy, I just see everyone from all over the globe. This is really exciting. Chicago, Boise, Idaho, Canada and Ontario. I see LA again, Long Island. This is like amazing. Michigan too. So welcome everybody. A little bit of housekeeping just so we can keep things very focused on why you're here tonight. Hope, we are so lucky to have you, and we all want to hear everything that you have to say. So the best way we can do that is to keep our mics muted. Right now, please mute all of your mics so we can focus and listen only to Hope. And then when we have time, there will be ample time for a Q&A. If you do have questions, please, please, please put them in the chat. I'm Allison Gilbert, and I got many emails from you prior to even the doors opening this evening of questions that you do have already for Hope. So I promise you, we will get to your questions for sure. I would also encourage you, in addition to keeping your mics muted, for now, it's less confusing when there are so many people in a Zoom meeting. If you wouldn't mind keeping your cameras off for now. That way people won't have to look for where Hope is or look for where I am. It'll just be easier to find the speakers. We will have time to turn your cameras back on again. So we're going to start, and I'm so glad that you guys are here tonight. Let me just offer a little bit of introduction before we go into our main event, which is my friend, the fabulous Hope Edelman. I am tickled pink to do this with her and for her this evening. I'm Allison Gilbert. I'm an author. I'm based in New York, which is where I'm joining you from today. It's 6 o'clock here. It's 3 o'clock on the West Coast. I've been really lucky, fortunate. One of the greatest blessings that's ever come out of the deaths of my parents, the death of my mother, is the fact that I got to meet a woman named Hope Edelman. It has been an extraordinary privilege that's taken me across the country to do work with Hope here and in California. It's taken Hope and me across the world, where we brought women to Machu Picchu, Peru on a hike, and we can definitely talk more about that too. It's an extraordinary thing to call someone not only a mentor, not only a friend, but someone who you absolutely, from the core of your soul, respect. You respect her integrity, you respect her professionalism, and you respect her open heart. So I am thrilled, Hope Edelman, to have you with us tonight, this afternoon, and we're so thrilled that all of us together in community can be here to support you in the launch of your latest book. So yay, Hope, we're so happy to do this with you and for you. Let me introduce Hope Edelman before we truly get into the Q&A that I'm going to be leading tonight. As you know, Hope Edelman is a pioneer, a groundbreaking writer who broke the mold back in the early 90s with her book, Motherless Daughters. That was my entree into who Hope is, what she has to say, and the gravitas of her personal experience and also her professional capacity to dig deep and to do the kind of research that resonates with us all. And I say us, meaning I am a part of you. I could just as easily have been a participant listening to Hope, because I need what she has on a personal level. And now as a professional writer myself, I need what she has, because so much of our work is informed by the hardcore nature of reporting that other writers do. So I take my hat off to Hope Edelman. So she wrote the groundbreaking book, Motherless Daughters. I'm not going to name every one of her books here. You can certainly find out more about Hope Edelman at her website, which is hopeedelman.com. But you can also know she went on to write other works, Motherless Daughters, right? Motherless Mothers. It goes on and on and on. And now, so many years later, we are coming to the AfterGrief, which is going to be a very important lesson for all of us to understand. What does that mean? And how does that inform how we all move forward and through our losses? So Hope, welcome. Before I start pestering you with questions, welcome.
Thank you so much. Allison, I realize now I should have kept some tissues nearby. That was such an amazingly beautiful introduction. My heart, my gosh, thank you so much. I was thinking today, how long have we known each other? I think 2004? Does that sound right? You
Yeah,
interviewed
that does sound right. Yeah, that's when I first started stalking you. Yeah.
Well, I remember it actually, you emailed me.
Yes.
It was really soon after my father died. So that must have been 2004. I hadn't yet talked with anyone about losing my dad.
Yeah.
Which came so many years after my mom. And you were doing research for your book, Always Too Soon, about adult orphans.
Yes, I wanted to interview you about your experience losing both parents, because at that time, as you just said, the loss of your dad was new. And so I thought, since I was writing a book about losing both parents and what it really meant to be an adult orphan moving forward, becoming a mother, and what it meant to raise kids without my parents, that your perspective, given the fact that you were just newly without your parents, would be an extraordinary inclusion. So yeah, we've been friends to my great fortune for a really long time.
Since '04. And that means that was before Motherless Mothers. I was probably writing it at that time. It was before you wrote Parentless Parents.
Yep.
So that was pretty far back. And you remember we did a 92nd Street Y event too. And that was the first time we met in person. Oh my God. Am I remembering correctly? It was you, me, Geraldine Ferraro.
Yes.
Mariel Hemingway. I don't know. It was just this amazing group of people that you had
100%.
And that was really fantastic. And we all talked about what it was like to have lost both of our parents and be adults in the world without them. Yeah.
Which is the perfect segue, which is, what does it mean to be in the world when our losses may be 5 years in the past, 10 years in the past, of course, 20 years, like that duration and the after grief, the name of your new book. How did you come up with that term? You coined this term. What does it mean, and what do we have to know about it so we can feel that we're getting a little bit of a glimpse behind what's to come in your book in October?
Well, I was writing about what I call the long arc of grief, because as we know, we don't get over it or get past it or move beyond. I mean, we carry the people that we love with us forward into everything that we do. So I was writing about what grief looks like 10 years later, 20 years later, how it shows up for us 30 years later. It doesn't mean that we got it wrong in the beginning. I mean, that's a very natural progression of events. So I live at the top of a canyon in LA, and I was driving in my car one day down a canyon road to get to Pacific Coast Highway. And I was just really addled. I was thinking, God, what is the word for what comes after grief? There's no word for it. And I feel like grief is a term that we rightly should apply to those first couple of years when we're so out of sorts and we're so full of sorrow and it's so painful, but then it does transform or alchemize into something else. And sometimes it can turn into some really good things too, like a sense of meaning or purpose or appreciation or gratitude. And I just couldn't think of a word for it. I even looked in other languages thinking I'll borrow from another language. You know, we don't have to stick to English here. And I couldn't find one. And I just kept thinking, what's the word for what comes after grief? And then I was rounding a bend on this road and I thought, I think we should just call it the after grief. And I got down to Pacific Coast Highway, got my cell reception back, texted my agent and my editor and said, what do you think? And they said, not only is that what it's called, that's your title.
Wow.
So that's how we came out. And I think of the after grief, it doesn't have a hard beginning because it's different for everyone. You know, some of us may enter it after 6 months, some after a year, some after 2 years, but I think we get a sense of when things are shifting for us. And we're moving out of that really what we call the acute phase of grief into what sometimes is called the new normal, or what's going to be the rest of our life without that person. So I think the after grief starts around there and it extends for the rest of our life. And it's about how we find meaning and purpose in that loss.
So there's no way, Hope, that you can, sorry, it's hard with Zoom. Sorry about that. There's no way to assign a timetable, right? It's not like it's 2 o'clock and you're in the after grief.
No, not at all. But what I can tell you is that not all, but most bereavement centers and services are funded to help people in the first year or two after a loss. And I have heard countless stories from people who say, my dad died 12 years ago and I'm about to get married and I'm really missing him and it's coming up. and I called the local bereavement
And
center.
so then,
We're going to need everyone to
Hold
mute.
on.
so, and I'm not sure if you
You know what
noticed,
I'm going
but
to ask you guys to do? I thought we had muted all the microphones.
because you saw
And when
that.
Now we can't hear you, Allison. Allison, now we need you to
Yeah,
unmute.
I gotcha.
Okay, that's
Sorry.
okay.
Let's
That's okay.
all hopefully keep our mics muted so we can really hear and focus on hope. So we were talking about whether or not it's time bound, and the after grief period may show up at different times. So it's not like you're expecting it to happen on a Thursday in August.
No, and I was talking about how I've heard stories from people who say they call a bereavement center and say, my dad died and it's really coming up for me now, I'm about to get married, or my mom died, or my sibling died and I'm about to graduate from a college, or I'm about to have a child, you know, and these are times when it bubbles up, right? And the bereavement center will ask, how long ago did your loved one die? And if you say 12 years or 15 years or 30 years, they typically don't have programs for you because they are helping people get through those first couple of really acute years. So I am really interested in providing services and a language for discussing what this long arc of loss looks like, and then some services to help people when it bubbles up over a lifetime, because as we all know, that's bound to happen.
So when you might get pushback, not you, Hope, but one might get pushback to say, well, that sounds like your grief is complicated, like complicated grief.
Right.
And
Right.
so I wonder where clinically the pushback is. And I wonder where you sense the pushback maybe from, let's say, well-meaning friends and family who think that you're maybe giving permission for grief feelings to go on, maybe beyond what other people think is appropriate. What's the distinction between complicated grief and what you're describing? How would you know?
Well, complicated grief typically means that you're not able to function in your daily life. You know, that the depth of sorrow that you had at the beginning of a loss really hasn't abated. It's persistent and it's getting in the way of you enjoying your life or being able to function optimally. I think that's something very different from functioning optimally and then, you know, a couple times a year or every couple of years having what I call a flare-up of grief. Right. Because, you know, you catch a whiff of the perfume that your mom used to wear, right? That's a sneak attack. Rebecca Stover at Modern Lofts introduced me to that term, a sneak attack. Or because you're reaching an age correspondence event, like you're about to turn the age a parent was when they died. That's huge. And that won't happen maybe for 20 or 30 years after a loss. So it used to be called pathological grief if you were still having those responses 10 or 20 or 30 years later, but now it's considered pretty normal. Most clinicians in this field actually have a loss in their past, and that's why they went into this work. And they know that the adjustments that we make take place over a lifetime. So if there's pushback, I'll discuss it, I'll welcome it, and we'll work through it then. I don't anticipate a lot because I think so many of us know what I'm talking about here. You know, I functioned very optimally, and then I got pregnant with my first child and had a big grief flare-up, and allowed myself to feel it and worked through it. And then it was a couple years before I had another one. So that, I think of that as actually pretty normal for this population, not pathological at all. I think we have to change the language around pathology so that we can accommodate the experience, because if this many people are having these experiences, I doubt they can be aberrant.
Well, it's really interesting because you are creating a new vocabulary, perhaps creating a new vocabulary that might be then infused into some federal policy where bereavement services might be extended. And then wouldn't that be the ultimate gift to be able to provide, to actually break statutes based on your findings and the fact that you've come up with and given words and made it more concrete for us to discuss?
Wouldn't that be great? I know there is an initiative now led by Evermore, a nonprofit in Washington, D.C., to start changing some of the policy around bereavement leave. Do you know, the average American only gets 3 days off after someone they love dies? And, you know, in most cultures and religions, that's not even enough time to bury your loved one, let alone to start grieving them. And So yeah, I would love to see that. What I'd love to see is that we get bereavement days where when we have grief flare-ups and don't have to take personal days or sick days for that either, because the culture understands. See, we need to change the conversation. The culture needs to understand that this is bound to happen and that people just need some time to adjust. And most of all, they need the social support. Because I'm going to just go off on a little tangent, Allison, but I know you're going to follow me because I know you feel the same way, which is that grief in this culture, because grief is very culturally relative. So when I talk about this culture, I mean mainly modern Western culture, has been considered an emotional experience and a psychological experience. And if you get into a support group or work through a bereavement center, some of the social component gets taken care of. But it's also a spiritual experience. Yeah. And if you're not particularly religious or don't have a strong belief system that talks about what happens after death, you may feel a little bereft. It's a physical experience as well. And I think we have to hit all 5 nodes there to really help people adjust to a loss, especially over the long term. But we've lost a lot of the social component. You know, we don't talk to each other. We don't know how to support each other. It's so critical. 100 years ago, people knew how to do this. And we just sort of fell off the train with that. And I'd like to, you know, help people find their way back on, because it's so essential for us to lift each other up at these times.
Without even knowing, you've led me to my next question, because you purposefully use the word people, not women.
Uh-huh.
And I think when people think about your work, it's been rooted in something very gender specific, right? Yes. Motherless daughters, mm-hmm. motherless mothers, mm-hmm. Your motherless daughters retreats, right? Like you lead these amazing retreats right now, gender specifics. But I wanted to extract for people, the AfterGrief really marks a shift for you. You're talking about individuals, not just women right now. So men are now welcomed into this much richer, bigger conversation, not a better conversation. It sounds like you're bringing it into a much broader, non-gender specific audience. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, over the past 26 years since Motherless Daughters came out, I've heard from a lot of women who've lost fathers. I've heard from a lot of men who've lost mothers. And I've spoken with a number of men who've lost fathers, plus a number of people who've lost siblings. So yes, I think of this book as Motherless Daughters for grown-ups in a sense, but that's mainly because I feel like I was such a baby when that book came out. I wasn't even 30 years old yet. And there was so much I still had yet to learn about what grief was going to look like over the long term. And there are extraordinary women in the Motherless Daughters community who've been there from the very beginning. I know some of them are on this call, and it's so good to see them. There are women from the retreats on this call. There are women who have taken my writing classes. There are lots of people on this call, you know, from various layers. But this new book does seek to expand the audience, because so much of what I wrote about in Motherless Daughters really did apply to other forms of loss. And so this new book is for men and women who've lost a mother, a father, a sibling, a close friend, a romantic partner, any loved one. I dabble a little bit into loss of a child, but that is a very different form of loss, and it is covered well in the literature. My emphasis in this book is on what we're calling long ago loss, and the strong emphasis is on losses that occurred during childhood, adolescence, young adulthood. But I do interview people who were 40 years old when their sibling died, or adults who lost some children as well. But the emphasis is on parents or siblings when you were young.
So in the book, I was struck by the rings of grief, which is another term, another coinage of you. And I'm hoping that you can share with everyone on today's call what you mean by the rings of grief. How many rings are there? What do they mean? And what do you mean by that?
Okay, well, I think I have to start by talking first about the stages of grief, which I think we're probably all familiar with because it is so deeply embedded in the cultural lexicon in America, for sure. And that is the idea that grief happens in 5 stages, based on the brilliant work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her 1969 book on death and dying, Denial, Anger, Bargaining, Depression, Acceptance. There's a lot of, discussion around whether grief really works that way. Most bereavement professionals think it doesn't. It doesn't happen in those kind of silos. It doesn't happen as a linear progression. That's not what Kubler-Ross meant to begin with, but that's how the culture started interpreting her work. So, but again, that's just really talking about how we start right at the time of loss and then get through the next year or two. So I went looking for a model of long-term adjustment and I couldn't find one. And I looked really hard. I mean, I worked for 4 years on this book, looking for kind of an interdisciplinary model that would hit all 5 of those nodes that I was talking about, but would also show us how grief ebbs and flows over time, how we will get sucked back sort of into those intense feelings and then we'll be spit forward again into our regular lives. And I couldn't find one. So I started just listening to the people I was interviewing, and an organic model started to grow out of their stories. And that's what I call the rings of grief. So I think of it as 3 rings, kind of like a bullseye, like the Target store logo, there's a circle in the middle and then there's a ring outside of that and then a ring beyond that. And that circle in the middle, I think, is what I call the red hot core of grief, or the inner core, which is where we have all of those really intense feelings and emotions and thoughts after a loved one dies. And then over time, again, it depends on your relationship with the person, the kind of loss, how old you were, many factors from loss to loss. You start expanding out into that middle ring, which is what I just call the ring of everyday life. That's where we get back to regular functioning. And then oftentimes we can expand even further into the ring of growth, which is the field of post-traumatic growth. Talks a lot about how loss can be a springboard for other things in our life that are actually quite positive. Can be appreciation, can be gratitude, can be a new career, can be that we become more committed to our human relationships, right? But at any moment, I think we can suffer another loss or have a sneak attack or reach one of those milestones in our lives. And then we sort of shrink back into the middle. We have those feelings again. That's when we feel like, oh God, it feels like, I'm losing them all over again. Or, this is how I felt right after they died. But we don't stay there typically for as long as we did the first time. We can retract into there for, a couple hours, minutes, even a day, a couple of days. If it's the year, if you're reaching the age you were when your parent died, you may move in and out of that space for the entire calendar year until you pass that age. But I think of it as a process of expansion and retraction over the long term. Does that make sense to you? Because Allison, this is your life too. I mean, you're living this. Does this make sense to you?
It totally makes sense.
Yes, because the book's coming out in October.
I'm going to put you on the spot because I don't know the answer to this question. And so maybe there's no there in my next question. So forgive me. But is that the genesis of your book cover? Your book cover, the jacket looks like a wave, right? It looks like waves. Oh. And it kind of communicates fluidity. And sorry to put you on the spot, but is that where the book design jacket came from? It's beautiful. It's blue. It's expansive. It seems very inviting and as if you're kind of caught up in motion.
I suspect yes. I did not design the cover. The wonderful designer at Penguin Random House did. Yes. So we have to ask them for.
I had to ask.
But I like the cover for that reason, because it is a series of waves, and that is the idea of ebbing and flowing. So yes, I'm pretty sure it was inspired by that, and I liked it for that reason.
I know we've talked for about a half an hour. I do want to be able to answer some of the questions both in the chat, questions that were emailed to me beforehand, but let me just prime the pump. We are getting to hope and being able to answer your questions, but I do have one more question to ask you before we do that. And the last question I really have prepared for you today is that you hit on it a little bit, that you've been teaching nonfiction writing for a really long time, for 20 years or so. And you talk a lot about rewriting your own narrative and owning your own story, and that we can constantly edit, right? We're both writers. We edit all the time, but there's something novel to hearing you say that we can also edit and tweak and redefine over time our own personal stories. And I'm wondering about the relationship between your writing and your support of writers, and the teaching that you do, and now what you're teaching us as readers in your new book, The AfterGrief?
Thank you for asking that question, because that's really at the heart of the new book. I've done some studies in narrative therapy, and in fact, next year I'm going to get a second master's in narrative therapy and community.
Wow.
And so at the heart of this book is the idea, actually it's more than an idea, I think it's a premise, that the facts of a loss don't change, right? Like my mom will always have died in 1981 of breast cancer when she was 42 years old and I was 17. I can't change those facts. But my relationship to those facts, that's what changes over time. So the story that I told about those facts when I was 17 is really different than the story I told at 35, which is really different than the story I tell now that I've passed my mother's age and have lived so far beyond her. I'm now 14 years older than my mom ever got to be, which is just plain bizarre to think about. But so I talk quite a bit in this book about how we can revisit our stories and then revise them into ones that strengthen and empower us. If we're carrying a story that's old, if our coping strategies date back to earlier times and have outlived their utility and are no longer helping us, how we can identify them and change them so that we can have better coping strategies moving forward. That's right at the heart of the book. And that's at the heart of my coaching practice too, and the retreats that I lead, and everything and the courses that are going to come out around the AfterGrief. All of that really honors the idea that we can go back, revisit our stories, and we can change the way that we see them, and therefore the way that we tell them. And because our stories are so linked to our identities, and our identities are so linked to our happiness, we can start affecting real change in our lives through that process.
And folks can learn, and I'll do this again later, but just because you mentioned it, theaftergrief.com is where folks can learn more. Coming soon in November to support the book's relief, I'm just reading off I didn't want to get it wrong. The AfterGrief online program will come in November. The AfterGrief community will have monthly education and support starting in January. So that's a wonderful thing to take yourself and throw yourself in if you're listening and you're interested in learning more. And of course, already, without having to wait at all, you just mentioned it too, the Motherless Daughters community is so rich. I know I helped co-lead a class with you in a course, a Motherless Daughters retreat in Connecticut. Mm-hmm. You know what you're doing. You know how to connect with motherless daughters. This is going to extend I cannot wait to see how it unfolds with this AfterGrief community. It's going to be remarkable to watch. It's going to fly. It's going to be so exciting.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears, Allison, because there's a lot of people out there suffering. And I do really firmly believe that grief from childhood, particularly unattended grief, as so many of us experienced because we weren't allowed to talk about our loss because there were no support services available. I think it's a public health crisis. There are 30 million adults in America right now who lost a parent or sibling before age 20. And then that number just explodes when we start thinking about who lost close friends, and loss in the 20s and loss in the 30s. And those of us who didn't have support in our grief. It manifests in all kinds of different ways in our lives: physical symptoms, mental distress, in our relationship patterns. And so, let's start talking about it and getting support for people, because it is never too late to reopen that box and start grieving. There are women who come to the retreats in their 70s and they grieve for the first time a loss that occurred when they were 5. And we just watch, their bodies change, their faces change, their demeanors change, because they're finally letting go of that stress that they've been carrying all these years, the stress of not talking about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think what you're saying is right on. As a member of the board of directors of the National Alliance for Grieving Children, that is why that organization exists, right? To provide that scaffolding around children, to hopefully reach as many as we possibly can, to make sure that as they grow forward, as you were just talking about, some of these conversations can happen, because they will be the adults who didn't deal with their grief. And so I'm just echoing what you've just said. I want to introduce Grace, who's working with me tonight to host and to manage the incredible turnout for this event. Grace has been here going through the chat so I can focus on my conversation with Hope, so she can see the themes that have bubbled up into the conversation this evening. And so she's helping us identify what are the common threads that more people want Hope to talk about. So Grace, I would love you to help identify for Hope some of the questions that you think she should tackle. Maybe start first. What seems to be bubbling up for you first in the chat, Grace?
Well, first, Hope, Allison, thank you so much for this meaningful discussion so far and giving us a sneak peek into the AfterGrief. So one question we have that came up via email is from Anne, and also if your question comes up, please feel free to turn on the mic, turn on your video if you're comfortable and join the conversation. But Anne asks Hope, what would you like to see in the future for the motherless daughters community? It's gone through so many positive changes over recent years, and I'm wondering if there's anything specific you would like to see happen.
That's such a good question, because the motherless daughters community, and there's Anne. I see you, Anne. Hi, Anne. Are you in your car? I see you. Hello, dear. The motherless daughters community has been in existence since the mid-1990s, soon after the book came out. And so it has been a burgeoning community with support groups all around the world, luncheons that typically occur every May. This was the first May there weren't any luncheons for obvious reasons, but on any given year, there's typically between 30 and 60 luncheons happening around Mother's Day in different countries. And then the retreats, of course, and online communities. What I'd love to see is for the women who've been involved in the motherless daughters community and have started doing some of that healing work to be the ones to go out there and start spreading the words to others. And we have an incredible team of women who volunteered, a volunteer corps. We're calling them the AfterGrief Street Team, of women who've been to the retreats, who are helping to get the word out on social media and calling their local libraries and bookstores, and everyone can do that. Let them know that the book is coming out in October, asking them to order it, because there are so many people out there still hurting who don't have the kind of community that Motherless Daughters provides. And that's the AfterGrief membership is going to hopefully do that. We're planning on having this monthly membership where you can also participate in support groups that are specific to your type of loss. And if enough people participate, it can be your type of loss and also your age at time of loss. So we're going to get people who have similar experiences together to share their stories, which is, I think, some of the most healing activities that we can do. So I'm hoping the Motherless Daughters community will expand after they get the healing and the support that they need into service. And that's where my work has gone. And Allison, that's what we did with our Peru trip. It was called Turning Loss into Service. Wasn't that our subhead?
100%. And part of our trip to Peru was not only hiking and having a good time and being with other parentless parents. That's the book that I wrote about losing both of your parents and also raising your kids at the same time and how to keep those tethers to your parents through your children, even if your parents never got to meet your kids. That was my case. And so we brought these women to Peru, and what a dream that was. And we served, the service part was that we went to an orphanage in the shadows of Machu Picchu. So if tourist dollars went to Machu Picchu, then these kids would not have benefited from that. And so we went there, and that was just a remarkable experience that I will just, I cherish.
Yeah, we did service work at an orphanage in Urubamba. We raised money for them. We built a greenhouse for them. Yeah, we did a lot of service there. So that's where I'm hoping the Motherless Daughters movement will go. First into the healing and support of fellow motherless daughters, and then into service and spreading the word to anyone who has a long ago loss that, who might still be struggling.
So more trips are in our future, Hope.
Oh, I hope so. I hope so. Once we can fly safely again.
Yeah, exactly. Grace, tell us what else you're seeing, Grace.
Yes. So Nancy asks, what is one of your book's conclusions that you are most looking forward to sharing with readers and why?
I think it's what I said at the very end, which is our ability to revisit and revise our stories. Because oftentimes we think that our story is a fixed construct and that it is what defines us. It's a hard story to carry forward if your story of loss is the one that defines you. But we can expand that story, we can crack it open, we can find ways to change it, we can find ways to reframe it. That's an exercise we do at the Motherless Daughters retreats that I'm eager to bring into the AfterGrief, this idea that we can reframe our story, that the ending of one story is always the beginning of another. If the story that we tell over and over is the story of how a loved one died, we can also, without erasing that story, certainly, but create an alternate storyline to walk beside it about how that event also triggered a series of events that have led to some good things in our life. It's okay for us to acknowledge that. It's actually a really healthy act to do that.
You know what my favorite word is, Hope? My favorite word in this discussion is the word and, A-N-D.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And is the most powerful word. It could be, yes, my mother died of ovarian cancer when I was 25, in my case, and I'm happily married and have kids and can move forward professionally. Both can be true. And the and is powerful because it doesn't discount my pain or my loss or the void that I feel. It's just another layer. If we can all come away with so many lessons tonight, I would love to add that I love the word and, that multiple stories can be true even at the same time, and embracing your present and leaning into what your life is now, even when that's joyful and you have great friends and you're really into a celebration. Mm-hmm. There's no room necessarily to keep so much guilt. It could be, and you're not somehow disavowing that loss in that relationship. So I just wanted to share because it seemed very in tune with what you were saying.
Right. And when we talk about, putting a positive spin on events, I think there's often either the assumption or sometimes the mandate that we let go of the hard story and replace it with this positive one. And I never, ever ask clients or readers to do that. I say that story of hardship is real and we don't have to give it up, right? But we can add another, like I said, alternate storyline, the and storyline. This is what we call two truths at the retreat. I think you probably remember that, Allison. That two things can be true at the same time. And as I say in the AfterGrief, the human heart and brain are amazingly complex organs. They're capable of handling two emotions at once. They can handle sorrow and gratitude at the same time.
You can have your cake and you can eat it too. See, I mean, it shows up everywhere.
Exactly. Francis Weller calls gratitude and sorrow together the prayer of life. And I really love that. That's in the epilogue to the book, that we need to marry the two of those together to really have a full, rich life. So we're not asking you to give up the sorrow, but we're saying what can walk side by side with that sorrow to soften it and to strengthen you, right? Two things can be true. They can exist at the same time. They don't have to cancel each other out.
Grace, before you go on to a new chat question, do you think that you can scan and someone can put maybe in the reactions a thumbs up if they want to say something to Hope and actually talk to Hope through the camera? Maybe you can identify, we can put our cameras on. If you want to say something or have a question for Hope, you can use that reactions button, do the thumbs up or the applause. Grace can identify you, and when she does, we would invite you, of course, to unmute your microphone. So Grace, I would love to give folks the opportunity to speak to Hope one-on-one.
Great. I will definitely keep an eye out for that. I think right now, Lindsay has a thumbs up. So Lindsay, if you want to turn on your microphone or video.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm a little embarrassed to turn my camera on because it's like after the day. I live in New York and I look like I've had a really tough day, but I'm going to turn it on because I want Hope to see me.
Oh, good.
I'm so sorry, Hope.
Oh my gosh, you're beautiful. Look at
No,
you.
not. I just wanted to say thank you. I lost my mom in 11 weeks to stage 4 pancreatic cancer back in 2019. And my mom was my best friend. And I just felt so lost. And you helped me so much.
Oh, thank you.
And if it wasn't for like these opportunities, I just would feel very, very isolated.
Right.
So I just, not my finest moment, but I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. We need the support of other people to hold us, right? To contain us, to lift us up, to travel with us through those hard times. You know, it's called companioning each other in our grief. I love that term. It's not trying to fix someone who's grieving. It's just sitting by their side and saying, I'm here. I'm here. I'll listen. I know it's hard and I can handle the hard stuff. Tell me about it. Tell me how you're feeling. Tell me what's on your mind. You're still so close to that time of loss, and to lose your best friend and your mom in one person just a year ago, that's still just right at the beginning of this journey. So I'm really glad you found this community and that you found it helpful. Are you part of the New York City Motherless Daughters group, Lindsay?
Yes, that's how I found you.
Oh, good. That is an incredible, one of the most active and largest motherless daughters groups in the world right now. And it's got several administrators. I know at least one of them is on the call today. And yeah, I'm so glad you found that community. And we're going to work on creating AfterGrief groups like that around the world too, and continue to add motherless daughters groups. The motherless daughters groups are coming in all the time. One just came in Philadelphia. I think one of the women who's leading it is on the call today, because we haven't had one in Philadelphia for a long time, or the Philadelphia area. So thank you. Lindsay, what else has helped you during this year? Maybe you might have some words of inspiration for other callers today. What's been useful or helpful to you the first year?
Therapy, keeping a close group of people that I trust that were already in my life. Thank God, my family, my husband, running, reading your book, joining everything that you post. Unfortunately, because of COVID, it limited me because I was looking into the retreats.
Yeah.
So I think for me, I don't want to monopolize, but I think COVID really set me back.
Yeah, it's been hard.
A very isolating time, which is a time when we all need to support, but we're all isolated. So, but I think that I journal 3 things I'm grateful for every day. I don't know, just really trying to make sure I eat and sleep. And it's been
your food's ready.
You know what?
I don't know if any of that was good.
Everyone again to mute their mics, or Grace, maybe you can mute everyone's mic again, and then Lindsay, you can keep yours on. But I want to make sure that we can all hear Lindsay, and so let's please mute our mics, or maybe Grace, you can help us do that. But Lindsay, let's keep yours on so we can continue the conversation.
Yeah, I was saying exercise, therapy, keeping a close group of friends, journaling 3 things I'm grateful for every day, reading your book twice. I read it twice. Reading, joining anything and everything you're a part of. I read your posts all the time. I've met the Motherless Daughters group in New York City. I think just really just trying to do anything I can for self-help, sleeping, trying to eat well, and exercising.
That's great.
Everything my mom would have wanted me to do, honestly. Even though she's not here, I still try to honor her and do everything that she would have wanted me to do.
And you know what? I just heard you hit on all 5 elements of grief. The intellectual or the cognitive by reading a book, the physical by getting exercise and eating and sleeping, the social by having a good group of friends, the emotional by going to therapy, and the spiritual by honoring your mom after her death. So I know it's so hard, but I think you're doing great, Lindsay. You're hitting all 5 of those elements, and it's just hard right now. It just is. I'm so sorry that you have to go through this year, but we know that it doesn't get better necessarily, it gets different. That's what we say at the Motherless Daughters retreats. It gets different, and the different gets easier to carry. Yeah. I promise you it will, but I also know how hard it is right now. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for sharing that story with us.
Thank you so much, Hope. Thank you.
We have a hand raised from Gwyneth. If you want to turn on your mic.
Hi. Sure. I had posted something. I'm in my 50s and I lost both my parents in my 20s to car accidents that were 6 years apart. And I'm an only child. And one of the things that I had posted, and you can see I'm not like still crying about them, but one of the questions I had, and a bunch of other people said, yeah, that's a question, is for those of us who lose parents as children or young adults, but then as we hit, like, the parentless parents really help, but especially for those of us who are only children, it's very, I'm not sure whether my grief is, it's more for what I've lost in society as well as like losing my parents, because our society is so focused on your immediate family. And a lot of what I experienced in my 30s, early 30s, as I had a child of my own. Actually, at the time my mom passed away, he was a month from being a year old, and I was a single mom. So I had a lot of people who were like, well, I don't have time to do anything for you. I just have to focus on my own family. And it was really hard to try to do everything by myself. Yeah. So I did. I mean, I had a few friends who stepped up from out of state and who like took away some of the hurt from other friends that I hurt. I had some very hurtful things happen with people who offered help and then were really mean about it later. Saying, well, I got to focus on my family. You got to figure it out. And I'm like, great. But like that pain has passed. I mean, I've gotten through life. My child is now the age I was when my parents died. So just some of the things in society and the things of like at the school form of like, who's your emergency contact and how do you find, like, as only children? I just wonder if you can address a little bit of that. And I saw a lot of other people in the chat saying, yeah, only children.
Yeah.
We really need to do something for only children through the lifespan because we're just kind of adrift. Right.
Then you wind up being the only surviving member of your nuclear family. Right, exactly. And that, yeah. I actually know someone here in Los Angeles who's going to be writing a book about that, about people who have little or no family to rely on through adulthood. And if you are an only child, then you want to mention in the chat, it just might be nice for women to see how many are out there. This comes up at every retreat.
Yeah, there's a lot. That's why I went ahead and raised my hand, because a lot of people are going, yeah, me too. Yeah, me too.
Right. Right. And especially if you're the only child of a single mother, even if you haven't lost both parents, you may have functionally lost your dad. He might not be an active presence in your life. So the outcome ultimately may be the same, even if he's still physically living, or, you know, vice versa. If you, yeah, I mean, that's a really isolating experience. And then we find that we need to create that sense of family among our friends. At the same time, we can become rampantly independent, right? Because we have to think for ourselves.
I'm on the so far spectrum of leave me alone. I've got it.
Exactly.
That's not always healthy.
And that may serve us well in some aspects because there really isn't anyone there to help us. But then we can become so relentlessly independent that we don't know how to ask for help when it is available. And so that's a coping strategy that may outlive its utility in certain areas of our lives, especially in interpersonal relationships. I think it's a great idea. I think, you know, we'll think about that in the AfterGrief, maybe, of having some special either discussions or groups just for only children, because I do think that your experiences and therefore your needs are slightly different than the general population that does have siblings they can rely on or another parent that may be available to them.
Yeah, and my mom was an only child too, so there weren't like cousins, or it was like,
Allison, Gwyneth, thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. I want to give other people a chance to talk.
Clearly that resonated. I'm watching the chat. That is a very, you've struck a chord, and I know Hope could probably go on for much longer on that topic, but knowing that we only have 5 minutes left, I do want to mention a couple of things while we are all still together in community. And I know we all want to support Hope and make sure that her book reaches as many people as possible. So I wanted to say a couple of things of how we can all be FOHs, friend of Hopes, and support.
You're all my friends anyway.
So,
I mean, in my heart, you're all my friends.
Yeah. Let's keep Hope's mic open. Let's mute everyone's mic because this is really important. The first thing, and I say this as an author as well, I know how important this is. Pre-sales, pre-orders of Hope's book really helps. It gives book sellers the idea that, wow, something is really happening here. This book is going to be very popular. They'll print more copies at the publisher. So pre-order the book. Wherever you buy your book, please order your book. It doesn't matter the retailer. Just supporting book with pre-orders before the book comes out in October would really give Hope a boost. Join the AfterGrief community. Hope has already launched this website, theaftergrief.com. That's also on Facebook, by the way. So you can find website information, but also right when you get off this call, there's already a Facebook community. So we can take this chat right now and we can go on over to Facebook and continue the dialogue. I mentioned this before, but I know with 4 minutes left, I wanted to remind you in case there have been actually people joining us even 5 minutes ago into the call. So if you've missed this information from the very beginning, it bears repeating that coming soon in November, so the book comes out, the AfterGrief comes out in October. That next month in November, there will be the AfterGrief online program that Hope was talking about. And then the AfterGrief community will have monthly education and support, and that will start in the new year in January. So I think there's like amazing avenues. There's a lot of different ways of entering this AfterGrief world and getting more invested in it, which I think is really important. And until then, there's of course the Motherless Daughters community and the courses that are already online.
That's at motherlessdaughters.com. Yes, and we will be creating service opportunities also for you to help others and ideas to help spread the word and take part in the growing new conversation around grief that we hope will continue to grow.
Yeah, that's really, really important. Maybe we can end, Grace, with one chat question, like a lightning round for Hope. Give her one last question off the chat, and then we can say goodnight and to thank everyone for coming. But maybe you can cherry pick one that you think Hope can answer as a way of saying goodnight and thank you everyone for joining us.
Well, one, I think, fitting question that someone asks, Mary asked it. She wants to know if this conversation will be available as a recording because she knows a lot of people who would benefit from it and would love to share it with friends. So will that be possible?
100%. So I'm in charge of the housekeeping. And so tonight what I will do is I will edit it, not the content, but just the stuff that's the noise beforehand, before and after. So it's just the stuff that you most want. And I will send out, my plan will be to send out an email tomorrow for everyone who asked to be in this call. And then of course you can then share that link and spread the word about Hope's courses, which I really hope you will. I hope you'll send that email about her courses, about the book, the AfterGrief, and yes. So that's a long-winded way of saying yes, of course there is.
And I would like to thank everyone for being here today, for taking this step in your own education, your own healing. And I want to say a special thank you to the members of the street team who are here today. And also I see some people who were interviewed for the AfterGrief. I interviewed 81 people, and some of them are on the call today. And it's really, really good to see your names here. And thank you. Thank you for sharing your stories. Those of you who do read the book will read some of their stories inside of it. And they were very, very generous and gracious in sharing their histories with all of you for the greater good. So I hope you'll continue to share your stories with us and with each other and with whoever you know, and keep spreading the word. That's what this is all about. Yeah, and Allison, I want to just let everyone know that you have a course coming up that is one of a kind. Can you just tell them about it just for a minute? Because I want to make sure you get an opportunity to do that, because it's really an exceptional course that you're about to offer.
Well, thank you. I was a part with HOPE, the Global COVID-19 Relief Coalition. And as part of that work, we are honoring and recognizing how hard it is to lose a loved one, whether or not they died of COVID, but during this COVID time. And how do you make memorials, virtual memorials, more meaningful and more impactful, so you can really give your loved one the service that he or she so deserves and that you want to give them. So on August 20th, I'll be launching this course that's called How to Create Meaningful Virtual Memorials. So if that's you, thank you, Hope. Come on over to my website. You'll see courses, and it's launching on August 20th, and there's a lot of discounts now. So come on over. That'll be great. So I wanted to, thank you, Hope. It's 7 o'clock, a little bit after 7 o'clock here in New York, a little bit after 4 where my friend Hope is. Grace, thank you for helping us moderate. You are extraordinary. Recent college grad. I love working with you. You are extraordinary. Hope Edelman, you are one of a kind. I hope this book flies off the shelves and you're on the New York Times bestseller list for 100 weeks, if not more.
Well, one would be great too, yeah. But 0 is fine also, but thank you. Thank you. Well, it's going to take a village. It's going to take a virtual village releasing a book during a pandemic.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I appreciate everyone being here and whatever help you can offer to spread the word. And Allison, thank you so much. It is always a joy to see you. I wish we lived closer.
I do too.
Our friendship has spanned 16 years. It has gone up to 13,500 feet in the Andes, and I look forward to much more.
Me too. Good night, everybody. Thank you guys for all coming. I really appreciate it. And I'll send you out the link to this entire call. So thank you so much.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.